We can start.
नमस्कार, जय गुरुदेव, जय जगन्नाथ। गुरुर् ब्रह्मा गुरुर्विष्णु गुरुर्देवो महेश्वर गुरु साक्षात् परम ब्रह्म तस्मै श्री गुरवे नमः। ओम सहना भवतु सहनौ भुनक्तु सह वीर्यं करवावहै तेजस्विनावधीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहै। ओम शांति शांति शांति। Welcome all of us to Sri Sri Advanced Global Center for Conflict Resolution and Peace Studies at Sri Sri University. We have today is a great day. Today is observed as International Day of Peace by United Nations. And we have a webinar on the topic, the implications of Afghanistan crisis for world peace. Peace is intrinsic to human life. Not only human, nature also loves peace. If we can see all the scriptures of different religions of the world, it talk about peace and happiness. All our scriptures, moral values give us lessons and techniques to live in peace and in harmony with nature. Since 1981, the International Day of Peace is observed by United Nations on 3rd Tuesday of September. However, since 2002, this was being observed on 21st September every year. So if peace is so common and so easily available, why it is construed so elusive in this era, in this world, in this pandemic time, have changed our lives. In all our lives have changed personally, professionally, and societally. In every aspect, our lives have changed. You might be knowing that by April 2021, over 687 million of vaccine doses have been administered, but 100 countries in the world still could not get a single dose of vaccination. People are caught up in conflict due to lack of healthcare facilities. In this trying time, which is no less than a tryst with destiny, Afghanistan had a governance issue we all know. Many people had many speculations, many affiliations, many comments to share. Today, to talk about this important topic on the implications of Afghanistan crisis for the world, please, we have with us eminent soldier scholar, Brigadier Dr. L.C. Patnaik. Welcome, sir, to Sri Sri University. We have the honor to have you today here. And I take the privilege and honor, it's my honor to read out his vast experience to have served this nation selflessly for more than 4 decades. He was an infantry officer with services in high altitude and glacial battle zones of Ladakh and Siachen, anti-terrorist and to counter insurgency operational areas of Jammu and Kashmir, Nagaland and Mizoram. He has commanded a line of control brigade on Indo-Pakistan border and logistic information on the Indo-China border. He has served as India's defense advisor for Middle East in the Embassy of India, Tehran, United Nations Peacekeeping Forces, and Indian military training team in Bhutan. He was president of the Armed Forces Service Selection Board and chairman of the Odisha Public Service Commission. Brigadier Patnaik, despite his combat background, has immense practical experience in conflict resolution and military diplomacy in Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan, Central Asia, neighboring countries. He was actively involved in calibration of Indo-Iran politico-military relationship during Iran-US nuclear standoff, Indo-Iran gas pipeline project, and North-South corridor project. He was selected to lead India's first and largest international disaster relief operations when massive earthquake hit southern Iran in 2002. He was responsible for many infrastructure projects in Afghanistan, including famous Jarang-Delaram Highway project. He was also the advisor to Commonwealth Games. We welcome you once again, sir. We have immense pleasure to welcome you in this platform to have a peace talk today. And with us today, we have somebody who is very dynamic, Dean, who have joined us recently, Professor Usha Arora, a lady with having immense academic um, experience of more than 36 years. She is serving as the Dean and Head of the Faculty of Management Studies at Sri University. She has authored 9 books, more than 100 research papers in national and international journals. He has attended more than 100 international and national conferences, guided more than 20 PhDs, and has more than 200 students he has guided in postgraduate level. She has held dean position in many occasions in different universities. She is an academic administrator, is an academic and administrator, a rare combination. And we welcome you, madam. It's such a privilege that you have excelled in personal and professional life.
Thank you. Thank you, Vijay Lakshmi Mohanty. Thank you. So nice of you.
Now I welcome sir to give his speech, and after that we would like to hear special comments from Usha madam, and then we may conclude and we may take a few questions. We may open the question chart after 40 minutes so that we can take a few questions. Over to you, Brigadier Patnaik, sir.
Thank you, ma'am, and all the audience who are here today. Firstly, Jai Jagannath and Jai Gurudev to everybody. On this wonderful day of the International Day of Peace, it's my sincere wish to everybody to have a promising and a hopeful day so that we see the future with us and for the next generation live in peaceful conditions. I am thankful to Professor Usha Arora and also Dr. Vijay Lakshmi Mohanty, who have given this opportunity for me to share my thought process on this wonderful day. I'm also thankful to the Institute, the Sri University, especially the Advanced Global Center for Conflict Resolution and the Peace Studies, who have organized this particular talk today. Now, this topic of Afghanistan crisis as a potential threat to the world peace cannot be more relevant as on today, especially in 2021, when we are celebrating the International Day of Peace. Because this alone geopolitical movement has got the potential to destabilize the regional peace and become a threat to the world peace. So we shall see as to how exactly the issue is going to affect the peace as far as the world is concerned. Prior to that, before I handle as to the topics, the subtopic that I'm going to share with you, this relates back to my large experience of handling the Middle East affairs and subsequently remaining in touch on the academic front with what is happening. I'm also associated with the National Security Advisory Board. So we do have discussions on various issues of the peace, the threat to the peace as far as the region and the world is concerned. Now to come to the specifics of this particular issue, I shall discuss this in about 3-4 parts so that you get a better understanding of the particular situation. First is that what were the compulsions? I repeat, what were the compulsions for a US withdrawal? Number 2, why did the so-called Afghan National Army, which has been trained by the United States and also the NATO forces, failed or rather did not come up to expectations? Third, will the present resistance movement at Panjshir Valley succeed? And fourth, since the civil war is almost imminent, what will be the implications as far as the regional peace is concerned, and what will be the impact as far as the world peace is concerned? First and foremost is what are the compulsions as far as the VS withdrawal is concerned. If you all recollect, on 15th July, President Biden made an official statement as far as the Afghan withdrawal is concerned, wherein he highlighted three important aspects as to why he is withdrawing. Firstly, he said that the military objectives against Al Qaeda and Osama bin Laden have been achieved. That's number one. Number two, we did not go to Afghanistan for nation building. This was the official statement. And third, even if you withdraw, we're going to provide over the horizon security as far as Afghanistan is concerned. Appreciably, the second and third are at variance with each other because the United States has always believed in an Afghan-led and Afghan-owned government. And it is for this reason that in the last 20 years, they spent more than $2 trillion US as far as Afghanistan and training and ensuring that the nation building of the Afghanistan is done. So $2 trillion is not a small amount of money. Having said this, the strategic considerations which led to the withdrawal was firstly, there has been a paradigm shift in the US policy. If you have to take it right from the concept of Madeleine Albright's theory of indispensable nation and dominance, and as it flowed down to President Obama, his theory of American exceptionalism. And third, Joe Biden's thought process of coexistence. So if you see the flow of last 20 years, the thought process from dominance to coexistence is a tremendous shift as far as US foreign policy is concerned. Number two, the rise of a new world order, that is the emergence of China, which was not anticipated so early to have come to a military threat. There was already an economic threat, but not a military threat as far as the United States is concerned. Hence, Americans feel that they need to secure the interest more at home before they start moving into the international arena. And third, there is over a period of time the Americans having a low reliance on the Middle East because the energy is no longer an issue. Americans have come out of the shale gas and they are quite well sufficient with their petrol and the oil issues, and with the alternative energy of the electricity and hydrogen gas coming. So the Middle East is, in future is not going to be an important geopolitical importance for them. Hence, the decision to withdraw, we may think that it has just come now, but actually it was thought process way back in 2014 when President Barack Obama was there. Ever since when the decision, first when the decision was taken, at that point of time, there were more than about 1.2 lakh US troops, including the NATO forces. But by the time the Doha Accord took place in February 20, that is between the Trump administration and the Taliban, the figures had come down to 18,000. And in April, when the order for the withdrawal was given, the US troops were just about 6,000. So if you see the flow, that the Americans have already decided to pull out from this particular region 6 years back, but the push came in just about a year plus with President Trump's Doha Accord and also the President Biden's decision. But despite this long thought process, we saw that there was a chaos which led to a huge amount of explosions which took place in Afghanistan airport, killing 13 US Marines and large amount of civilians. So in nutshell, since we are part of the armed forces and one is aware that tactical operations, even if it withdrawn, is always planned. But this was definitely has led to a large amount of chaos. So a withdrawal which is supposed to have been done in a very, very designed manner after 20 years has actually not been done in the manner it's supposed to be. But no operations in the world are actually foolproof. They always have certain amount of shortcomings. The compulsions are very well not known to us. But what has happened to the Afghan National Army, which was basically nurtured and trained not only by the US, NATO, but even Indian army. And as of today, we have more than 600 Afghan officers and men who are trained and stranded in various training academies in India. So we have been taking a very major role. We have got into the infrastructure. We have been contacting with the Afghan National Army. But there's something which happened is that the Afghan National Army could not resist the Taliban move or the onslaught in the last days. And just to take a glance as to what is this Afghan National Army, as to why it failed, just to give you some statistics, it had an army of nearly 2.8 lakhs. Out of the 80,000 are special forces. This has got police 1 lakh. It's got unarmed police of nearly 1.5 lakhs. So such a large force of nearly about 4.5 lakhs, about 500,000, and that too with the US support, in the sense they've been trained, their equipment are available, their intelligence was available, despite that they failed. As I look at it, there are various analyses as to why the Afghans failed, but one of the major reasons is that there was a deep concern about the casualties, mostly the civilian casualties. Now, the troop casualties in the last 20 years was something to the tune of 1.5 lakhs, and the civilian casualties has gone up to 5 lakhs. Now, the Afghans, at common Afghan army, common Afghan people started thinking that why are you losing so much of precious human lives? It is a fight between a superpower, the Americans, that try to establish a hegemony, and the Taliban force. But the actual things is that the people of Afghanistan are getting affected. So there was when you talk of 500,000 people in last about 20 years, you can well combine the family and the extended family that has been affected. So it was not a happy-go-lucky situation. One might be trying to read, as far as the newspapers are concerned, that the Americans have been establishing large amount of empowerment programs and infrastructure and so on. So, but the fact lies is that a country cannot afford to have nearly 500,000 people killed in the last 20 years. That's one of the major reasons. The second is that there was a large amount of mistrust between the political and the military commanders over a period of time. And there's also a large amount of mistrust between the common man and the hierarchy, both the political and the military. Now, no military in the world, or other progressive military, can really fight if their top leaders are not in sync with what the troops think. And if there is a lack of trust, then obviously the morale of the fighting force gets absolutely to the zero. And this is what happened, because at a point of time, the common Afghan army of soldiers and officers felt that the higher leadership have failed them. High leadership failed them in their trust in the leadership and their aim per se, because everybody fights for an aim. So this was a very serious lacuna as far as the leadership thing is concerned. And one of the reasons is that obviously all of us know, come on the papers, is that the huge amount of corruption which used to be there in the administration, both political and also with the various NATO forces. So this is something which is was concern, and something which has developed in last 3-4 years is a rising nexus between Pakistan, China, and Russia. Firstly, the Pakistan, China, and then of course Pakistan, China, Russia. Now they were determined that they need to now move out America from this particular region so that they can have their say. And Pakistan was playing a very major role as far as the issue was concerned. So all these factors, when it actually combine it, both the military moral factor, the civilian casualties, the geopolitical factor, you can well imagine that a nation will not have the will to fight back. So this is one of the reasons that no army can fight without a strong political will, or for the matter, the back of the citizens per se. So when the army failed, obviously the nation failed and the sovereignty went into the hands of Taliban, who have large amount of power in terms of arms, ammunition, and the drug cartel is concerned. Now, having said this, that what is the implication that when the Americans moved away so quickly and the Afghan Islamic failed, it actually happened that the Doha Accord did agree that certain amount of arms and ammunition will be given to the Taliban because they require it for self-preservation. But the amount of arms and ammunition which was left behind is actually colossal. Just to give you a little a certain amount of figures, is that it is something $85 billion of worth of equipment today have been left by the Americans with 75,000 vehicles, 200 helicopters and aircrafts. Of course, what the Americans say is that they've taken over the electronics and the offensive equipment. 6,000 light arms, and that is small arms and equipment. That is what you call rifles and machine guns. 6 lakh. That's not a small number. And huge amount of night vision goggles, body armor, biometric devices, and most important is that the Afghans who supported the US and the Allied forces, okay, most of them have been left high and dry. So with such a thing now at the hands of the Taliban and the Afghan National Army nowhere in sight, the implications are far very, very large. That we will come after this. But prior to this, all of us are aware that there is a huge resistance which is taking place in the Panjshir Valley, wherein there are conflicting reports of whether these resistance movement is successful or not successful. But my analysis says I have traveled in that area extensively, and that's a very, very rugged area, and the Taliban will find it difficult to overcome the resistance. The huge amount of psychological warfare is being played out by the Pakistanis and also the Afghan people. The Pakistanis are supporting militarily, but the issue is that the Afghan resistance is still intact. There are no reports so far that it has fallen. So, to my way of reading is that it's not going to get wiped out, though they might be weakened, but it's not going to get wiped out. If that be so, then the situation that is going to emerge, the situation that is going to emerge in Afghanistan is something of a civil war. And the civil war is going to take place not only between the erstwhile militant groups and the political rivalries. It's going to start among the various tribes and also among the civil population. One of the most disturbing things that has happened is that Afghan women have now taken onto the streets. And if this particular resistance moves on, then it will be a civil war of a different kind. Now, can the world really can accept the fact that a country which has been under domination for two superpowers 20 years, first the Soviet Union, then the United States, is left in such a state that there's a complete civil war with so much of arms and ammunition? Well, the matter is a lot of things to be concerned. Now, what has happened is that, having said this, a situation of a history with pullout of the United States, the decimation of the Afghan army, and the emergence of a civil war, it is definitely not a very, very good situation. So the impact that is going to have, firstly at the regional front, as far as the peace is concerned, on a day of world peace, I think let's discuss that. What could be the implications of this particular world peace as far as the peace is concerned. I will first touch upon the regional before I get to the global part. First and foremost is that let's recapitulate the issue of the huge amount of arms and ammunition. Okay, which I just given you the figures, which has been quoted from official sources. And this is something which has become official. One are not aware as to how much of it there as far as unofficial figures are concerned. Now, this particular weapons, ammunition, and other issues are going to first find its way into the region. And one of the areas, sensitive regions that can flow into is firstly Iraq or the Syria, where there is a strong resistance which is still going on. It can flow into Kashmir, that we have seen. It can flow into the Caucasus countries. It can also be flow. It can flow into the Xinjiang province of China. And many of these things can be sold in the illegal black market of Peshawar in Pakistan. And I'm aware of many illegal markets which operates in Azerbaijan and Armenia and many other places. So when you find such large proliferation combined with a new created ideology of the ISIS, this is definitely going to give a boost to this particular movement, which has actually come to some sort of a standstill. Now, all of us know that a large amount of anti-terrorist operation has taken place in the Middle East by the Israelis, by the Americans, even by the NATO forces, and wherein the ISIS had come down to some sort of a taming, I would say. It had actually lost its leadership, and the backbone has been broken. But ISIS-K, who claimed that particular Afghan blast on the Afghan airport on 28th of August, if you recollect, that is ISI Khorasan, to be precise. Now, this is something, a new form which has come up, and it is, I would rather call it, is going to have more amount of, threat potential than the previous IAS, because it is highly motivated against the Shias. It is a totally Sunni dominated group, which is led by Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, who was killed, of course, in 2019. But then its splinter groups are far, far influential than any other groups which are operating in the Middle East, because it has extreme views on Islam. And his aims are not only a particular country, but his aims go into expansion of Islamic border or the Sultanate per se. And it's already have fought more than 250 clashes, recorded clashes with the US, the Afghan forces, also the Pak forces, and also the NATO forces. It is also a highly anti-Shiite and anti-Hazara. And why I'm trying to say this anti-Shiite and anti-Hazara is that, mind you, Iran, the neighboring country, is a Shia-dominated country, and Hazaras, who stay on the western part of Afghanistan, also has their brethren and relatives in Iran. Now, such strong fundamentalism of anti-Shiites, along with the anti-Hazara and anti-Shiite movement, just to repeat it, is going to have a serious effect as far as the Iranians are concerned. And if the Iranians are just trying to be now a little pally with them on issues so that this thing doesn't spill over to them, they cannot stop it. And if Afghanistan, Iran, combined with Iraq, all combined starts getting affected by the newfound terror outfit of ISIS-K, then it is going to spread all over the world, because this is basically the underbelly of terrorism as far as the world is concerned. And just to give you as to why my assessment is so strong as far as ISIS-K is concerned, is that they've already done this action in 2018 when they blew up the election office in Afghanistan. Then they did a wedding massacre in 2019, and they also did a treacherous school attack in 2021 this year. They already shown their cards and they mean business. So if this is the new group which is coming up, then this is going to be seriously affecting the regional peace. As far as the Kashmir is concerned, well, there will be determined effort to push in large amount of people in terms of, when I say people, the terrorists and the ammunition and the arms, and Pakistan is not going to leave anything, any stone unturned, consequent to the anger that his president has shown at the United Nations Council after the 370 abrogation. If you all recollect that fiery speech by Imran Khan in United General Assembly. So just to put the 2+2, I would say that the Kashmir situation is definitely going to be very, very volatile. And we heard yesterday that the government of India has already stopped the internet functioning as far as the border areas of Kashmir are concerned. So there are indicators that things are not going to be very, very hunky-dory. Now come down to the world peace per se, as I look at it. When I say world peace, the world peace is not only terrorist, but it is also related to the drugs. It's also related to financing. It's also related to the ideological intervention which takes place, and also is related to the migration which takes place and the threat threat to various countries which are liberal in nature, who would like the Muslims, other people to come to the country. Now, consequent to all this, you see there are many countries you'll be aware, including Germany and very secular countries. They've been very, very apprehensive of allowing any Muslim immigrations to take place. Now, a Muslim migration, which is one of a major concern, earlier it was humanitarian, but now with these weapons and people who are fundamentally driven, if those people start entering the countries in Europe, if they start entering the countries in Africa, in Central Asia, then it is going to definitely be in the same line, in the same league as the thought process of ISIS-K, that is ISIS Khorasan, of expanding Islam beyond the borders, what they've envisaged. And when you combine this with Al-Qaeda philosophy, though it is at a little second rug now, but their philosophy also remains of exporting terror and Islamization throughout the world. So this is going to give a strong amount of fillip as far as the threat to Europe is concerned, threat to the Central Asia is concerned, and to Northern Africa. The signs of destabilization in Northern Africa are already imminent, and Central Asia is imminent. That is why yesterday's news of President Putin trying to press upon the erstwhile, countries who are part of the group, the security group, not to allow all these people to enter. They were not going to accept any immigrants or any refugees as far as Afghanistan is concerned, because there is a threat. In the guise of refugees, people are going to enter these countries and then going to create new bases. So now, what is the threat as far as to the US is concerned, and as far as the Chinese are concerned? The Chinese are very sensitive as far as the Xinjiang province is concerned, and that is why they are getting into proactive mode of trying to help the Afghanistan with a bargain that I will support you economically, but you please don't interfere as my underbelly as far as Xinjiang is concerned. The Americans are for the time being going to take a call whether the Homeland Security is going to take care, or the previous philosophy of extending beyond their borders to prevent any attack on the homeland is going to continue. But since they've taken a decision, and their utmost aim, rather the most important aim, as others mentioned to you, is now to consolidate their domestic security and see how the new threat of China can be tackled. They will definitely improve the homeland security, but I fear that there will be more amount of attacks which will be taking place as far as the US soil is concerned. And so Americans have to be very, very prepared on this particular issue. So as I look at it, you see, just to summarize, because lack of time, is that the threat to the region, out of the newly emerging threat which is emanating from Afghanistan is going to be firstly in Syria and Iraq, secondly in Kashmir, and third in the Caucasus or in the Central Asian countries, as far as the region is concerned. And globally, is going to affect Europe and also it's going to affect the United States on their own homeland. So this is going to be supported by drugs, which is plentifully available as far as Afghanistan is concerned. This is going to be supported by huge amount of migration or refugee crisis. The UN has already set an alarm as far as the refugee crisis is concerned. The United States has asked for $7 billion to be immediately given. $50 million initially, then followed by 3.5 billion to look after the humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan. And the world doesn't come to take care or fund at this present stage as far as the UN is concerned. The UN will be helpless, and the whole world will be watching Afghanistan in actually flames. So this is a sorry state of affairs, and something which all of us need to be very, very concerned about. With this, I will end my talk today of highlighting the importance, highlighting the gravity, I won't say the importance, the gravity of the Afghanistan crisis and its potential to the region and the world peace. If you have to ask me to grade, whether on the scale of low, medium, and high, I would rather grade it high. So the world has to take care on this day of International Day of Peace, that when all of us want peace, we need to work towards peace. And then only we can think that we'll achieve peace. Thank you. Thank you very much for giving me a patient hearing. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I'm open to any questions that's there. Thank you very much.
It's an amazing insight that you have narrated, sir. Really very nice to hear all this. I request Usha madam to say a few words and give her comment, and after that we may open the forum for questions.
Am I audible, ma'am?
Yes, madam.
Am I
Yes.
audible? Yes. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning and very warm welcome to each one of you joined this webinar on this special day, a very special occasion, and especially we are fortunate enough to have amongst us here today a very eminent personality as our chief guest, Brigadier Dr. L.C. Patnaik. Sir, we are really honored by your presence here today and feel motivated by listening you in these wavering situations when every country, every president, every prime minister, they are giving their own statements from their own angle. So listening you, I personally feel that many things are clear in my mind. So sir, we welcome you to this event and thankful for your valuable inputs. I'm thankful to Dr. Vijay Lakshmi Mohanty, moderator of this program, for giving me an opportunity to interact with this august gathering on this special day, International Peace Day. International Peace.
Madam, आपका
International peace. But if we take this term in a very small sense, small perspective, we all are in need of, in search of peace at individual level. So, but at individual level, everyone wants to get peaceful and secured life. But at the same time, if we have to talk at the state level, national level, and international level also, because the whole world is going, it has been converted into a globe nowadays. So we have to think the things from the world level, from the world perspective. So I congratulate Dr. Mohanty for choosing this very important and relevant topic in the present day context. Particularly, this topic is implications of Afghanistan Afghan crisis for world peace. No doubt. So I congratulate her for choosing such an important, relevant topic on this special day, International Peace Day. The amicable groundwork put in by her, which has made this webinar a success. All my worthy colleagues, deans, chairperson, in charges, officers of the university who have joined this seminar, making this event a very successful, because working in a team always pays a lot, because it's a teamwork. To make any program success, it's a teamwork. Everyone is playing their role in different forms. So, sir, the rapid collapse of Afghan government forces and the Taliban seizure of power have shocked Europe and led to an intense debate about the implication of Afghanistan's crisis for the world peace. Just I take a very simple example. Sharir, the whole body we are having, even if there is a pain in a small part of our body, उंगली के अंदर भी थोड़ा सा दर्द हो जाता है, तो हमारा पूरा शरीर के अंदर we feel pain, है ना? I'm not feeling comfortable because there is a pain in my stomach, there is a pain in my headache, I feeling so like this way. The same is going to be happen. However, Afghanistan, it's a very, very small country, but the crises which are going to happen there, which had happened there, they have given a challenge to the whole world, because the whole world peace is going to be affected by these people, what they are going to do. So here I would love to say that Europeans are left with several unavoidable questions. In the first instance, these revolve around the best ways to get their citizens and those who work with them out to safety. The media is giving vast exposure, presenting the things in such a way. Sometimes each individual, each country, they are having some fear in their mind, what is going to be happen. Wavering situation, no stability is there. So we want the solutions of this problem. The debate, introspection from various angles need to be prepared for the situation, whatever may be there. We have to prepare for the situation. However, whatever we are forecasting, whatever we are going to predict the things, this will happen, this may not happen, this will happen, this may not happen. It's all ifs and buts we are indulging. But still, we need to sit together and providing such type of the platforms where we can have various debates, introspection from various angles, so that we have to be prepared for every type of the situation, whatever may be it in the future. All our activities, program, planning should be guided by the principle of sustainable development, which we need, which is the need of the hour even. We need to act responsible citizen in order to maintain the goodness of life for the future of each and every individual, of each and every country, and totally, I can say, at the global level. To wrap up, I would just like to say that we need to address these issues at the grassroots level in order to be a global citizen. This event is no doubt a small step in this direction, and we hope such type of interactions will definitely continue for the benefit of one and all in future. So with these words, I once again thank Honorable Chief Guest, Brigadier Dr. L.C. Patnaik ji, and all the august gathering who feel concerned and associated with all these important issues, social issues, ethical issues. So we again need to sit together and have some sort of introspections and debate from the various angles to find out some solution if something is going to be happen in future. So with these words, thank you one and all. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, madam, for your presence, madam. We have given madam and sir very less time, but this shows a great amount of their character. They are so unassuming, being so busy and intellectually so sound. They are so unassuming that they have agreed to attend within in a very short time. Thank you, madam. And thank you once again to sir also. Let us take some questions. I got few questions. I would like to request first Sri PKV Gauripati Sastriji, who has worked in Hindustan Aeronautic Limited in leadership position for more than 3 decades. He has a question to ask. Yes, please.
Jai Gurudev. Am I audible, first of all?
It's
Yes, sir,
audible.
you are audible. Yes.
Yeah. Brigadier L.C. Patnaik, sir, is such a great talk and insightful talk. My question is, we have been watching the situation in Afghanistan for quite some time. And in paper, it has come in so clear terms that America had already decided to leave it to the Taliban maybe 1 year back, during even Trump's time. What stops the international leadership? Like even I can include our own Prime Minister. He's to me, he's the most popular person in the whole world because he's the leader of the biggest democracy of the world. I feel that India has not been given the due respect or due position in UN. I am a vocal since long. I have been thinking and dreaming that India should find a place in UNSC, United Nations Security Council. But that apart, now what has happened has happened. Now, what is the role of, say, I put myself in Biden's shoes, what I should be doing now that I have withdrawn from Afghanistan. Now, I put myself in the shoes of our Honorable Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Now, everybody is knowing that it's a very alarming situation. Afghanistan is in turmoil, but by telling that the situation is very bad doesn't really help us. We have to jump into action. I have heard yesterday from news that whatever Modi ji is speaking, Taliban is taking it as a negative. They told, Modi ji told now Taliban has to be inclusive and they're not. And they have immediately retorted back telling that if India feels like that, they cannot help it. So, I mean, it appears to me that there is almost a breakdown between Indian leadership and the Taliban, who's in position of power in Afghanistan. Can we sit quiet and allow the situation to still boil down? And I mean, as you have already told, Kashmir is also a burning pot. Always it is a boiling situation. So it will overflow into Kashmir and we'll have a lot of problems. As everybody knows, Kashmir as it is a very flashpoint always. So what immediate actions are required internationally? We are talking about International Peace Day of Peace today. So UN has been, I was discussing with my friends, UN has been a failure all through. So then we should change the system and call for a system which will be more effective. And how many failures we have to accept from United Nations? I mean, these are very commoners questions. I can vouch that I'm not an expert in international studies, as my sister Dr. Vijayalakshmi Mahanti has told. I just retired from Hindustan Aeronautics Limited, but definitely like a rightful citizen and a peace-loving citizen of the world, I want world peace all over, and more so in the immediate neighborhood of India. So your thoughts around this? I'm sure I just want to know what India should be doing immediately. If you put yourself in the shoes of our Honorable Prime Minister Narendra Modi, sir, or Joe Biden, or maybe UN chief, it appears to me that people are again discussing in pockets. No clarity as of now has evolved. Thank you, sir, giving me this opportunity.
Yes, sir. Patnaik sir, if you can answer. Yes.
This is a wonderful thought process which actually keeps working in the minds of a large number of people. And why such confusion and in the thought process, and there is no clarity even at the highest level, is because of two reasons. First and foremost is that the US decision to pull out was not taken they were agreed in principle, but the methodology of pullout was by and large dealt by two administrations. Now, the first decision was taken in Doha talks in February 2020, wherein certain conditions were laid down, and initial conditions of the Americans were not accepted by Taliban. Later on, the US had to agree, and US agreed primarily because in February 2020, it was Trump's desire. And if you go back by the poll records, he was thinking that he will come back as president again. And certain things politically, he was wanting to take a extraordinary, recognition. But those terms and conditions were definitely not very suitable. It was not disclosed then, but then it has now come out, and well, definitely it was not very palatable. But the question remains that the second US administration, which went into a final decision, had all the options to even revise that particular thing. Why did they revise it? What were the compulsions for them? This compulsion is, as I just mentioned to you at the initial stage, is that the geopolitics of the particular region has dynamically changed, and the national interest of the United States, the priorities as far as the national security and national interest is concerned, that is also dramatically changed. Now, many people feel that, President Biden, with so much experience being a vice president, how could he take this particular decision? But whenever we pull out from any quagmire, any trouble spots per se, you are always expected or rather appreciate that there will be violence, there will be problems. To give a small example, when I was in the army, we kept on moving from place A to place B. So anytime we pulled out from Kashmir, I remember whether my given it to the commander or the brigade commander, we should take special care that no casualties takes place. But despite all our precautions, there used to be something or the other, the blast, the insurgents used to, or the terrorists used to strike us, and kuch na kuch hamla hota tha. Now, this was anticipated. Americans are also very professionals. It's not that, the US military is very professional. I have handled with them personally at various levels. They're very professionals. But it was a risk which was taken by President Biden that even if there is casualties, he has to pull out. And so this was the compulsion of the US to reiterate the point that I told you, the New World Order is something which the Americans themselves did not expect it to come so soon. The emergence of China, both as a military and economic threat. Economics was there, but military threat definitely was not visualized in 2025. Now it has come down in 2020. So this is something of a very great security challenge as far as the Americans are concerned. And what are the major areas where the aspect conflict is possibly in Taiwan or in the Red China Sea? That is why the emergence of the new security alliances of Quad and the AUKUS, which are coming into play. And mind you, it has all happened in just about a year's time. Quad can go back another 2-3 years, but of this major decisions taking place. And if you just relate all these things, all these alliances, military alliances, is primarily the link goes to the security scenario, the threat scenario, as far as the US faces now and the world is concerned. So for them, the Middle East is now going to be a low priority. They're not going to be much involved into that. Now that leaves to the Indian options as well. If we say, if we're the Prime Minister Modi's shoes, then what do you think about it? Like the world was taken by surprise, even the Indian administration was also taken by surprise, including Prime Minister Modi. We had, in fact, if you had such certain amount of information before, at least a lot of action could have taken place in pulling our embassy in time, sending the Afghans who are stranded here back to the country. So the very fact that nothing could happen and all this thing has to be done in a jiffy So that means the reaction time that was available to us very, very less. Now, in such a situation where all of us know that the Pakistan has played a very strong underarm game along with the Chinese, how to actually handle this particular challenge sitting out here. Because military deployment, as far as Afghanistan is concerned, that is something which we have not accepted for not now, but right from beginning also, because you are aware that the Americans have always been wanting that the Indian Army should at least deploy a division out there. But India has refrained from physical military deployment. We've only gone for humanitarian deployment. So our concern is that large amount of projects which you have done, whether they'll be attacked or not, the Taliban have said that, okay, they are not going to destroy because we constructed the parliament, we constructed the road, we constructed the dams, and large amount of other humanitarian activities. So if the sense prevails, they will not destroy it, and they have also promised us not to do it. But geopolitical, where do we stand on these issues? Because there are new political alliances which are coming up, wherein new players like Turkey is coming up, Chinese are coming up, the Russians are coming up, and there is very little space in that particular wilderness for India to put its nose around and to find out as to where we can put our feet in. But whether it is Chinese, whether it is Russians, or it is Turkish, or for any country for that matter, the only country which enjoys a large amount of goodwill among the population of Afghanistan, I've traveled a lot in Afghanistan, so is India. No other country in the world enjoys that as much amount of goodwill as India is concerned. And to share with you, majority of the Afghans, including Iranians, hate Pakistanis. They don't like the Chinese. Okay, so India had to now basically optimize its human will, the goodwill that prevails in Afghanistan, to convert it into some sort of a relationship, and that is why it is embarked upon a wait and watch policy. If you see the foreign minister, the way he has traveled in last about 2 months, it's been amazing. He's been actually halting from one capital to another capital of the world, trying to find out a solution to this, because practically speaking, we are not interested in putting the military there. So how do you optimize that human capital, our humanitarian goodwill? And more of it will come up, I think, when President Modi is meeting President Biden. So some sort of things are come. But as of today, if you ask me, Indian policy options are hazy. We, except for the fact that the CDS and the army has been told to say that we are fully prepared. Yesterday, I was hearing the Corps Commander's interview at Kashmir. So all he is trying to say that we are fully prepared and nothing can change us. This is something very, very routine statements. But practically speaking, diplomatic options as on today for India is concerned are very hazy. And I do not know which are the major things, alliances, or with which group are you going to move into. Though the Russians have given a certain amount of assurance that they will support us, but that is again flimsy on this particular issue. So practically speaking, the Indian options are not very clear now. Next question, please.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much. And now we have Dr. Jasmine Bhuria, who is a faculty with Faculty of Management Science. His son Devdutt, who studies in class 12, wants to ask a question.
Okay. Good morning to everyone. Thank you for such an opportunity for me and to my son also. Usha ma'am, our beloved Dean SMS, thank you very much for having this type of recent issue discussion with the students. And Vijaya ma'am, thank you also for organizing such a aptful theme on the Day of International Peace. Thank you so much for your kind presence and enlightening us and our students about the issues. And it's a brief time, so we don't have such a time to discuss more on this. I want my son, who is in class 12, he's very much into this political discussion. So I told him to join the session, and he's there also. And he just wanted to ask some questions he has in his mind. Thank you for giving me opportunity. I'm unmuting him. Wait for the second.
Good morning, everyone. And myself, Devdutt Sampath Rai. Currently, I'm in class 12, and I had a question. And so my question is that can the recent developments in Afghanistan be considered a direct threat to India? Because Afghanistan is our neighbor, and the new government is getting support from other countries like China and Pakistan. And so, if this is a threat, then and how it is going to be affecting us? And what could be the future strategies of the government, Indian government, to tackle this issue? Is it a threat, first of all? And if it is a threat, then how it is going to affect us, and what could be the strategies? So this is my question.
Oh, thank you. I'm very happy that a class 12 student has asked such an insightful question. That's really appreciable as far as the question is concerned. Now, coming to the response, the answer to that is that, you see, if you ask me whether it's an immediate threat, apparently no. Is it a medium to long-term threat? Could be. I don't even say that yes, it could be. Because even within Afghanistan, you know, the priorities are different. The Pakistanis may play up in such a manner that, you know, we're going to use the Afghanis as far as the terrorism in Kashmir is concerned. But there's so much of difference of opinion within Afghanistan that there are not many groups who are very keen to do anything in Kashmir. Because many people in the past have been swayed by these Pakistanis' lies and have come to Kashmir and seen what is happening in Kashmir, and they've gone back. And today the social media, which has actually come up in the last 15, 20 years, people are able to have a direct feel of what are the political situation in Kashmir. So there are not many groups which are very keen to basically act against India, especially in Kashmir. This problem was also faced by the Pakistanis when the Soviets went. And at that point of time, they had to hire Africans, Lebanese, Syrians, etc. I remember in one of the, you know, encounters, one of the classes that we had, my unit, you know, there was a Lebanese guy, you know, he kept on fighting for nearly 4 hours. You know, we had surrounded him. We killed about 5 guys, and the 6th guy was there, and was firing for nearly 4 to 5 hours. And when you found him dead, you know, there were nearly 23 bullets in his body. That means he could sustain 22 bullets before he actually succumbed. Now, when you went back to all this origin of this particular militants who have died, many of them were, you know, basically criminals in Africa or in other parts of the world who have been paid a very amount, a mercenary amount, to come and operate this. So, but subsequently, when I also operated later part, you know, in Kashmir, we have not seen any Afghanis coming, frankly speaking, as far as disturbance of Kashmir is concerned. At least not in last 5-10 years, no Afghanis are coming. Now, expecting the Afghanis to come and start creating trouble in Kashmir, only those people will get motivated who will be paid heavily and who will come on a very mercenary mission. They will not come in an ideological mission. They will not come in a mission for any purpose to attack the sovereignty of India. No. It is basically mercenaries will come, will be paid heavily, and to basically take care of this particular threat. Indian defensive systems have, over a period of time, taken care large amount of issues on the issue as far as the challenge is concerned. Those of you are little aware of how the defenses are prepared as far as the line of control is concerned. there are there are a series of fences, there are electrical barbed wires, there are mines, and deployment is. So it's quite a difficult call as far as any mercenary try to sneak in is concerned. But I don't rule out that couple of them will always infiltrate, because no defenses are impregnable in nature, and we have adequate amount of tiered system of defense to take care. So if you have to see whether these people can pose a military threat, obviously the answer is no. But in what manner can they pose a threat is when the talk of threat to India is not only in Kashmir. The threat can come up in any part of the country. Yes, as I just mentioned to you, the emergence of this new group, ISI Khorasan, ISIK, that is something dangerous element. And if they combine with Al Qaeda, try to reactivate the sleeper cells in India, which over a period of time we've been able to suppress them to quite an extent. Our counterintelligence wings are working very effectively. Yes, we may expect one or explosion in some part of the country. But that's something which we have to accept in this new world of terror, because it's a huge country of ours. If somebody trying to sneak in and with a population which is not very inimical, the large amount of divergence within a population. So this sort of thing can happen if at all required. But then consequent to 9/11, consequent to the Bombay attack and other attacks, our coastal surveillance systems, our electronic surveillance systems, our counter-terrorism systems, our intelligence gathering operations like creating of the NIA, then creating of the satellite navigation systems, and also the weaponry to fight this particular threat per se. Vastly. I can assure you, if at all, if I given a chance to assure this to the countrymen per se, the Indian Armed Forces are very well prepared, and including the paramilitary forces and the police forces, the intelligence forces, the entire security organizations have over a period of time geared themselves to a sufficient extent to meet any threat which is coming to the sovereignty of the country. Does that answer your question? Make you satisfied as a young class 12 student? Not to get worried at all. You have to work for the nation. And that's all. You have to move ahead. Is that correct? Have I answered your question, young boy?
Devdutt, is it? Yeah, Devdutt, you may reply. Yes.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Yes, understood it. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, sir. I have one last question from one of our faculty, Dr. Jayalakshmi Samal. She thanks you for the insightful session, and the question is, can the involvement of spiritual leaders give any tangible solution to this problem?
Okay. I think that's a very wonderful question as far as things are concerned. You see, spiritual leaders have a very large role in molding the way of thinking of the people are concerned. Spiritualism, as I look at it, is a way of life. And if people don't adopt the way of the proper life, the process of life per se gets disturbed and imbalanced. And that's why people tend to do wrong things. So I remember, when I was in the Middle East, we had invited large amount of spiritual leaders to come. But the Muslims are not very, very fond of getting Hindu spiritual leaders. But they, invite people who have got good amount of social standings. Okay. And we used to organize a large amount of lectures for people in that particular trouble spots, especially among the refugees. If you recollect, I had led a very major disaster operations in Iran before I went there. That is controlling the earthquake per se. So at that time we flew down a large amount of Muslim religious teachers from Indian Army, and they were told to take care of the spirituality and the spiritual training per se. I mean, if at all somebody asks me what is the solution to the problem of this huge ethnic rivalry that takes place between Shia and Sunni, or for that matter, various tribal groups in Afghanistan, or the various splinter groups of terror outfits. I think all these people have been misguided. They've lost their basic balance. And the spiritualism has a lot of space to basically take care of their thought process per se. Now, we can do that in many aspects per se, whether in terms of yogic exercises, or in terms of interventions, whether in terms of the teachings. But as an application of spiritualism, which is basically a Hindu-dominated one, to apply or work in the Muslim world is something which requires a different model and a different approach. It's not that it cannot be worked out, because a large amount of moderates in Iran and Iraq I have seen were very, very in favor of the Hindu spiritualism per se. In fact, there's many doctors in Iran I have come across, they strongly believe in Lord Ganesha. And I remember I've gone to a dentist in Tehran for my little amount of, taking care of my tooth. He was so, appreciative of our religion per se, or the spirituality process. He says, what a wonderful religion you guys have got. I said, what? He said, listen, you pray everything. You pray to a tree, you pray to a river, you pray to the sky, you pray this thing. And apart from so many gods and goddesses that you have got, but the very fact, he says, we like religion so much that, you all appreciate and pray nature so much. So these are something we have large amount of people having traveled in that part of the world who are very, very inclined and are very, very fond of the Hindu spiritualism. But unfortunately, they can't tell this openly, and the government cannot take on these things on an open basis, because once they declare a particular state to be an Islamic state, like Iran is Islam state, Afghanistan also declared Islamic state, Pakistan also declared Islamic state. When they declared themselves at a national forum, their Islamic state, they usually don't permit. But we have to find weekend ways. I don't say that there is no space. There are a lot of spiritualism space in this particular part of the world. And we have to sit down and make possibly think how exactly to handle this particular spiritual space. It's a difficult task, but not impossible. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir, for the wonderful deliberations and the patient hearing of the questions and answering to it so diligently, so nicely. I see many people from armed forces have joined as a viewer. So there is short time and there are a few more questions, but I think we would ask Patnaik sir in person those questions. We have to honor time, and we may have one more session if all of us need that. We also thank our Facebook viewers who are watching and who are going to watch it over a period of time. This will be uploaded in YouTube, so all time to come you can watch this as well. So I thank my deans and HODs, all the of Srishu University, and many students who have joined, many Art of Living teachers who have joined in Facebook as well as in Zoom. I thank all of them who have interest for this topic and who have interest for the nation. And Pujya Gurudev Sri Ravi Shankar ji has intervened in many war-torn areas and have brought peace. One of the glaring example is FARC, and he has mediated in Northeast, in Kashmir, in Babri Masjid, Ram Janmabhoomi, and in numerous occasions he has been invited also. So we take a lot of lessons from his values, and we are also the Center for Center for Peace is also aiming at coming up with all the publications of Pujya Gurudev, all the peace initiatives of Pujya Gurudev in coming days. We seek your help in reaching out this message far and wide, the message of peace to everybody. Peace is in fact everywhere, as Sir has told rightly that we worship everything. And this is what the world community is learning from India. This is such a beautiful thing that we are interdependent and we can never be independent. So we worship everything, and it's such a nice thing to honor everything, the life around us. And this day reminds us that there is no alternative to peace. And peace is so it is in everything. You name the topic, peace has to be in it, otherwise you cannot enjoy it. So thank you, sir. This topic, in fact, is being suggested by Patnaik, sir, and we just loved the topic and kept it as it is. So thank you, sir, for suggesting such a beautiful topic. My mother, Dr. P.S. Panikeswar, is also messaging your positivity, enthusiasm. And whenever I have interacted with any armed forces personnel from armed forces, I feel always energetic and enthusiastic. They are so positive, enthusiastic, nationalistic, and they are, it's full of belongingness. So it's an honor to have you here, sir. And we seek your advice for this Center for Advanced Global Center for Conflict Resolution and Peace Studies at Swiss University. If you can advise, we can spread the message across. And in all kinds of conflict resolution, we may contribute to this world community. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank
Have
you.
a
Thank you very much, Mrs. Mahanti, and the other audience out here. And just to sum it up, I can only tell you that in the last century or last 60, 70 years has been one of the most peaceful periods the world has ever seen. Despite when I talk of peaceful period, it's not that we have not fought wars. It is we have had a large amount of wars, conflicts, and various places. But what has made this period peaceful vis-a-vis the previous phases is that there are a large amount of institutions who are coming up to approach that how to maintain peace. Sometime back we spoke on the United Nations. Yes, there are a large amount of views on the United Nations. You will be amazed to know that we are a founding member of the United Nations in 1945, before we even became become an independent country. But somehow or the other we could capitalize on that particular issue. But the UN is finding, but since the whole purpose of why UN is working, not working is a different one. But all I can tell you is that a smaller, there is no step which is small or big for that matter. These initiatives of trying to establish centers of studies for conflict resolutions and peace. I can tell you, being a person for the armed forces, and being a combat and a special forces officer, who have actually done physical, strikes many times all my life. I can only tell you that the interventions of this nature, whether spiritual, academic, humanitarian, or otherwise, can play a very major role in changing the minds of the people. And once the minds are actually handled and appropriately, you will find those people will not pick up arms. And once they don't pick up the arms and come to the mainstream, a large amount of our conflicts, especially the insurgence areas in the northeast and the Kashmir, and of course the internal Naxalism, is going to be tackled. So it's not that the armed forces or the security forces are the solution. No, they are only a part of the solution. The larger solution remains the larger body of the human civilization, the population, the academicians like you, the spiritual powers, people of spirituality. Those are the major factors which will try to control or change the minds of the people who fight unnecessarily. So I'm very happy that this university has established the center. In fact, I think there is no other university in the state which has got this particular center who is thinking about conflict resolution and peace. I really congratulate the CDC University for having this center, and I'll be glad in any case if I could be help to you to move this particular issue. Thank you for very much for listening to me, and thank you again for giving opportunity to address all of you. Thank you very much, ma'am, and thank you all of you.
Thank you, sir. We look for an opportunity to have you in campus as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Jai Gurudev. Om Shanti.
Shanti.